Aging legacy equipment and pressure to continue meeting heightened customer demand puts manufacturers in a tense position, having limited time or resources to adopt new capabilities or implement changes effectively. So, how can manufacturers implement innovation with a commitment to results? To learn more, we sat down with Leo Vieira, the Digital Service Director here at Stefanini. I'm Daniel Graves, and this is the Steftalks podcast. With me right now is Leo Vieira, and we're very excited to have you. Today, we're kind of discussing innovation. We're focusing on how innovation applies within the kind of industry of manufacturing. And in particular, we're discussing how do we bring meaningful results that are driven by innovation, or rather innovation that's driven by meaningful results.
In our time, is innovation is survival for some companies.
And if I understand it properly, it's also that survival is pretty complex, right? Like the sort of systems that kind of go behind that innovation process can be fairly in depth and can have pretty wide-reaching kind of implications for kind of the equipment that's present on the factory floor, right?
Yeah, sure. And so as we have more and more technology, for example, you don't have a recipe, right? So you have to understand the environment, to understand what type of technology is there, what type of company, what type of digital maturity the company has. So the answer can be different for each one of those companies, right? In terms of innovation.
Yeah, and I think you made a really strong statement there, right? That innovation can mean survival for many manufacturers. So maybe kind of taking us to our next question: how does innovation improve manufacturing operations, or what are some of the tangible things innovation can bring to an existing plant?
Well, so you can think in many things, right? But for example, it can innovate to simplify internal processes, right? Or make people more efficient, or even find new sources of revenue. In some of the cases, or let's say most of those cases, you can achieve those objectives applying technology in the right point, right? And when you see technology applications, we have been seeing customers innovating, let's say, in three different levels, right? So the first level of innovation is, hey, I'm a car producer. I have another car producer besides me, and this guy is using a new technology that I'm not using. So this means innovation for this company in specific, right? In other cases, you can have intra-industries type of innovation. Like I see, for example, airport technologies being applied to logistics inside of a manufacturing, for example, right? And the third level will be, hey, this is a completely new technology, and anyone has tried that before. Let's try to our process, right? So those three levels, depending on the type of the company or the type of ability they have to innovate, they can have those three levels of innovation inside of the company.
I caught myself just kind of in preparation for our discussion today, just kind of looking at definitions for innovation itself, right? And yeah. It's interesting that the kind of the basic idea is just a new idea or a new thought or a new method, right? But that a lot of industry kind of definitions for innovation really are interested in practical steps, right? Like what are those tangible like things that you can do in order to make innovation a reality? And so, with that in mind, right, we do have these kind of big, even bigger buzzwords, I think, especially in the manufacturing sector of Industry 4.0 and smart manufacturing, right? That these things are sort of part of this larger definition of how digital technologies have influenced this industry. So how do those concepts of Industry 4.0 and smart manufacturing translate into practical steps? So where does a manufacturer's transformation journey begin?
Yeah. So yeah, a lot of points, and so you brought a good point of definition of innovation, right? So so we go into those practical terms. I like to see innovation. The way I see is changing that for imagination, right? Because that might be the best or the first word that comes together with innovation is imagination, because when you get imagination word and you separate that in two, so you can think, imagine, and action, right? So what you're doing is you are putting action in the image, and that can be the image of a future or a future state. You're putting action on that image that you have created, right? So, and then after that, you bring creativity, right? Which is imagination putting in a practical terms, right? So innovation is for me at least, it's kind of imagine a new scenario and use creativity to bring new things or new ways to the things, right? So when it comes to, you know, practical terms, right? So we know already. I don't want to, go into how those terms, Industry 4.0 or smart manufacturing, they were created and why they were created or when they were created. The important point is they are tools, right? And they are optional tools or technologies that can help companies to be more effective or more efficient, right? But in practical terms, before you use a tool, you have to understand what you need to fix, right? So I think the first point is to understand your pain points. It's to understand your problem, and that's going to help you start, right? So we always like a baby, right? So before you run, you stand up, you give some first steps, and then you walk, and after that you start to run, right? So again, start small, adopt, and that's very important. Adopt an iterative approach, right? So you're not going to have an innovation in just one shot, right? So just one process. So that could be a process of interactive actions, measuring the results, changing strategies if necessary, right?
It's so much of a mindset, right? Like you often you don't know what your problems are until you sort of change your perspective and try to rethink, how should things be operating, how should things be happening, right? And I have to imagine, especially in an industrial setting where there's so much of an emphasis on standardization and safety and so forth. It's sort of difficult to start asking those questions on a consistent basis, right?
Yeah, and talking about identifying problems. So when it comes to where should I, start, or how do I bring those technologies, choose the area that will give you the more significant result, or on the other hand, will make you, spend less money or waste less money in some of the operations, right? So define the goals. So and what do we used to do, right? So 10-15 years ago, we saw a lot of companies doing those multi-year plans, right? So 5-year plans. And so you don't see that anymore, right? So you see that people planning less and acting more. So doing more, but not doing something without a guidance, right? So it's just So the guidance should be the vision. So where should I be? And then giving small steps towards that objective.
What are maybe some of those challenges that you experience when you're kind of first beginning that process of innovation for a manufacturer?
The fact is, the manufacturers, they are commonly risk averse, so they don't take risk, many of them, right? So that's the first point. And innovation always means work with some risk. Right? So you are always so trying something that may not work, or may not happen the way we were expecting, right? So, and the first thing is to kind of mindset, as you said, right? So realize that innovation process will bring some mistakes to the table, right? It will bring some waste of money sometimes. And but the point is, and the key is to be prepared to have a flexible um, model that can help you, as I said before, interactively understand what is happening, and maybe changing the direction, right? Or even stopping a project, right? So we have been, seeing some prototyping process that never went ahead. So, but from the perspective of a prototype, that's a successful approach, because the prototype shows that a final product will not work. That's why prototyping is something very important as well, because you kind of mimic the solution, and you try that, and to validate some of the hypotheses you may have down the road, right?
And so, just kind of keeping that in mind, I've been kind of reading through some of our other case studies, right? And it's really interesting to see how, often, the ways that solutions are kind of developed for different customers, right? Like that often those happen while the production line is still moving. That things don't necessarily stop, right? Just because you have to continue kind of keeping your production output where it is, right? So I think that brings us to this broader idea. How do you implement meaningful innovation when you have an obligation to results, right? When you know that you need to have those specific numbers for your output, how do you sort of what does that innovation process look like, maybe then?
Yeah. So the first thing is, maybe you are not obligated to follow the buzzwords or to use the trending technologies, for example, right? So in many cases, that we have been seeing, you just innovate, just connecting the dots, or connecting systems, or even using the tools that you already have, right? So when you have the obligation to bring results to the table, it's a matter of understanding of where your kind of inefficiencies are, right? So how do you track that? How do you measure that, right? So you have more chances to succeed if you put efforts, where the process inefficiencies are. That's key for sure.
Yeah, right. Like that emphasis on your results, right? Then is kind of works both ways, right? You know that you need to hit these certain deadlines, but if you're aware of those results, right, you're more likely to see where those inefficiencies actually appear, right?
Yeah. So, but Daniel, to be very honest, the last maybe 3 or 5 years, I have been seeing some very interesting projects. So talking about specifically smart manufacturing, right? Because as I said, in the past we used to have projects with close scope, close time frame, and close budget, right? So nowadays we have people more concerned about the results. And so if we are seeing the results and seeing the value of that specific, project or specific initiative that you're doing, so you can give some flexibility, for example, on the scope, right? So you can not necessarily do everything that you have written in a initial project statement. For example, you are more flexible to move down the road, but not concerned about the number of features that your software you have, for example, but what kind of problem that software is solving at the end of the day, right?
Yeah, that maybe we're kind of seeing that same mindset that we were discussing for prototyping, right? But just on a much wider scale, right? Like
Yeah.
when you see that your results are going in the right direction, right? You know that these certain steps that you've taken are maybe producing the results that you're looking for, but then you might then question maybe those initial like broader steps that you had talked about or you had initially agreed upon, right?
Yeah, no, because this may be because my mindset already, right? Because we we as a technology company, we have to follow some contracts, right? And those contracts have a scope, and but we see some new, so not some, I would say a lot of customers be open to work in a more open way and really making our co-creation mindset work, instead of just being uh, just a phrase or something that I so we are really partnering with customers in a way to co-create their new level of maturity in their process.
So, do you think that that shift that you're describing, this maybe more open-ended process, do you think that that has, do you think that that has more to do with sort of the sort of technology that's becoming available now? Like, I think my understanding of it is that really the thing that's the advancements that we're seeing are sort of the product of having the ability to connect pieces of equipment or pieces of the production line, right? And having things be able to talk to each other in ways that they've never really been able to before, right? That just kind of opens so many doors. Is that maybe sort of what's causing that, or is there maybe something else that's kind of driving that just openness, I guess?
Yeah, it's a complete open-ended, right? So just because you brought, for example, a virtual assistant for your home, it doesn't mean you are done, right? So you can connect that with your, front door. You can, integrate that with your coffee maker. You can, so you have a lot of things that can make your life easier. And I always bring those day day by day problems to the table, because in manufacturing are the same, because we have people there, we have interactions there that needs to be integrated some way, right? So and one good thing on this environment that we are, right? So we, as Stefanini, we are a technology company that has no limitations in terms of what we can do in a manufacturing space. We have been, for example, applying a lot of user experience to the shop floor, meaning even the most manual and most aggressive environment, uh, or even in a more basic activity for the operators, you can apply user experience to understand the job and to bring, for example, tools and information for that person to make that task or work easier or more efficient at the end of the day, right? So that was something never considering before, right? So the technology builders, they are more, they have more the tendency to put everything on a screen. For example, let's put all the signals, all the data in the screen, and not the way it is done, right? So the flow is important. The way the data is presented is important, and how the information flow is coming from one station, for example, to other station is also very important as well.
Yeah, right. These have traditionally been considered more like workplace terms, right? Like, or things that are kind of more used in the office space rather than, the manufacturing environment.
Those are very common, let's say, IT terms, and very normal. But when it comes to process control or even manufacturing space, it's not that common, right? So this is the area that we have been making a lot of impact in our customers or partners that we have.
With that in mind, right, again, with this kind of thought that we're trying to focus on innovation that brings those really tangible results, what are maybe some resources that companies have in order to bring innovation to their to the factory floor?
Yeah, so that's a very general question, because that will depend on how the company is organized, what type of resources they have, and the level of let's say digital maturity that they have as well. But I mean, so to start innovate, you have to leverage let's say the multiplicity of minds that you have in your company, right? So sometimes you putting an automation engineer to talk with your IT area, you bring you a more efficient solution or a more efficient way to bring some data or some information to the system that you make you more efficient, right? So I think the most common or most general action would be leverage the multiplicity that a company has.
This was a thought that you actually, I think you referenced in your supply chain executive article. It was just that idea that, the real benefit of Industry 4.0 is maybe less about the actual technology itself and more about the people that are using it. So maybe what are some cases where Stefanini IHM has effectively implemented innovation in a manufacturing operation?
Yeah, so again, if we stick to the trending technologies, for example, we have been using robotization to replace or to take human from places that are not safe, for example, or we can use AI or predictive models to estimate a future value or a future quality parameter, for example, right? And some of those cases as well will be around those user experience. So identifying the customer, the center of your problem, and then bringing technology to help him to be more successful, right? So that approach would be we have been bringing a lot of tangible results for customers because of that, let's say human-centric approach.
I think we've kind of highlighted a lot of the kind of buzzwords that we see in the industry, right? Just because I think, there's so much chatter that kind of happens about them, right? That it's the emphasis kind of, again, focuses on the technology and not necessarily, whether or not that's meaningful for any given manufacturer, right? So what is the role of IIoT or the industrial Internet of Things You talked about it a little bit, but also AI in manufacturing. Are these just buzzwords? How meaningful is the impact of these technologies? And maybe what are some other examples of trending technologies that can have a meaningful impact on innovation efforts?
Yeah. So yeah, IoT in the industrial environment has a different approach, right? Because if you think in our lives, if you bring a smart plug for your home, for example, it is already connected to Wi-Fi. So it use network. It is collecting some data, for example, and it is sending to a central place that has an algorithm that it is taking some decisions, for example, right? So in the industrial environment, you already have some of those components, right? So if you divide, I usually divide IoT in 5 parts. So the first part is the sensor part of that. So what you are measuring, right? The the other one would be how you transfer that data. So the network that data is going through or sending that data through, right? The third component to be the data bucket or the data infrastructure that's receiving that data and how that is seated on this place. The fourth is the intelligence or the AI piece or the intelligence that is leveraging that data and taking decision and sending the data back. Sometimes is sending the data back to the sensor, for example, right? So, and the fifth one is so how that technology interacts with the human. So the human experience around that, right? So when it comes to industrial, sometimes you already have the sensors. Sometimes the network is there. Some of them use cable, some of them use Wi-Fi even. Most of the customers already have databases, and the maybe some of the missing pieces are how we leverage that data and how we take smart decisions based on the data that we are receiving, right? So IIoT in some cases is not just a piece that you bring in, is everything on inside of that single piece. It's more a kind of integration of the whole thing, right? Um, and again, so you ask about AI. So AI, we use AI in so many forms. We use AI to optimize. We use AI to predict. We use AI to estimate, and with different methods, with statistical methods, with phenomenological equations, for example.
But maybe just kind of as we were mentioning before, right? Like finding those touch points are pretty tricky, right? Like knowing where that's going to be implemented effectively is pretty challenging in its own right.
Yeah, again, it's as we talked earlier, right? Those are tools. Don't be afraid to not use a tool, for example, right? Or at least be aware of your problem. If you don't know how to do it, find a partner to help you make that, initial evaluation or even the initial trials or the initial prototypes for that problem, right?
Yeah, this is probably a faulty analogy here, but it's kind of like when you have a bad smell in your house, right? And you just don't notice it because you've gone nose deaf to it, and then you have a guest who comes in and they smell it right away, right? It's just just bringing an extra set of eyes, or in this case, an extra nose into the situation helps you maybe just see things that you wouldn't be able to see otherwise.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
but that's a fair point and a good point because if we look back, the most successful technology implementations we have ever done was the ones that the customers sit down beside us and help us understand what is happening and help us, bring the technology as well, right? I always say, hey, you are the one that knows your process better than me. I don't know. I don't know your plant. I don't know your process. And each one has their own, their own things, right? Their own specificities, their own problems. So even if you get a completely similar plant, you can have completely different technological solutions for both cases.
And then are there maybe other examples of trending technologies that are kind of making, having an impact on the manufacturing space?
Well, I'm the last month. So I'm a mechatronical engineer, and I always been passionate about robots, right? And I have been uh, studying, looking a lot about cobots. So those cobots are, robots that are able to work besides a human, right? So they are not replacing human, but they are, helping human with, repetitive tasks, for example, that may bring some fatigues or some kind of problems to the human. So that's one of the things that I'm looking a lot, and I hope we can get some ball rolling about a cobot.
They even have some setups where it's like you can manipulate like a robotic arm within like a 3D space for like those really kind of particular or repetitive tasks that typically have only been able to be performed by humans, right? But you have an operator who literally like positions it in the way that it needs to be, and then the robot itself remembers those kind of actions, right? And then that would be something similar to that, right?
Yeah, that's the primary difference between a robot and a cobot, because a robot, for example, um, they usually have inside of a manufacturing, they usually are protected by a cage. They have some in the space that the arm is passing through. They avoid to have humans there because humans can be hurt with a movement or something like that, which is different with a cobot because it's a very smaller scale um, robot, and it is safe for a human to be working besides a robot. So that's really the difference.
This has been a really great conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, and would love to do this again with you.
Yeah, sure. No, thank you very much for that, and yeah, looking to see you to see you soon. Thank you
Yeah,
very much.
well, we'll see each other. We'll see each other soon enough, right?
Yeah.
I want to extend a special thank you to Leo for joining us today. To learn more about smart manufacturing innovations, check out our Trends blog. And if you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe. We release new episodes every month. Until next time, this has been the Steftalks podcast.